My name is Martin Clay, and I'm 63 years old. 3 weeks ago, my son looked me dead in the eye and said 5 words that ended everything. You're just a burden now. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply reached into my jacket and handed him the worn manila folder I'd been carrying for 6 weeks. The folder he should have been terrified of. The folder he didn't even bother to open. What Gavin didn't know was that inside that folder was everything. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers. Recorded conversations transcribed word for word. Legal documents removing him from my will. Proof of every lie, every theft, every cruel word spoken when they thought I couldn't hear. I'd spent 6 weeks methodically building a case against my own son and his wife. Not for revenge, but for survival. And when he tossed that folder onto the kitchen table, without even glancing inside, without even asking what it contained, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd already won this war before he even knew we were fighting. The kitchen smelled like expensive coffee and cheap lies. I stood perfectly still in the doorway of my son's house, the house I'd helped him buy with $40,000 from the sale of my own home. And I listened to Gavin whisper to his wife Brielle, like I was already dead and buried. He's not getting better. The surgery didn't fix anything. He's just taking up space we desperately need. Brielle hissed, her voice carrying that sharp edge I'd learned to recognize over the past 8 months since moving in. The tone she used when discussing inconveniences like broken appliances or annoying neighbors who parked too close to her driveway. I know, Gavin said quietly, his voice resigned. But what am I supposed to do? He's my father. I can't just throw him out on the street. Tell him the truth. Be direct for once in your life. He needs to understand he's become a burden now. We can't keep doing this indefinitely. Josie needs her own room eventually, and frankly, I'm exhausted from walking on eggshells in my own house every single day. I cleared my throat loud enough for them both to hear. They jumped like guilty children caught stealing cookies from the jar before dinner. Gavin's face flushed bright red, but not from shame or embarrassment, from pure annoyance at being caught in a private conversation he'd been too careless to keep actually private. Dad, we need to talk, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd developed lately, the one that made me feel like a confused child. I heard you, I said quietly, my hands steady at my sides even though my heart was racing. I've been hearing you for months now, every whispered conversation, every complaint about my presence. Every plan you've made for my future without bothering to include me in the discussion. Brielle crossed her arms over her chest defensively. She didn't even try to apologize or explain away what I'd overheard. She just stared at me with those cold, calculating eyes, waiting impatiently for me to leave the room so they could continue their discussion about disposing of me. Gavin ran his hand through his thinning hair, the same nervous gesture he'd used since he was 12 years old, whenever he wanted to avoid taking responsibility for something he'd done wrong or hurtful. Look, Dad, you're a burden now, Gavin said. And there it was finally. The word they'd been dancing around for months, finally spoken out loud like a death sentence handed down from a judge. We have Josie to think about. Our future plans. The house needs expensive renovations. We can't keep doing this living arrangement. It's not working for anyone involved, especially not for us. I stood there for a long moment, letting those words sink deep into my bones. A beribur. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up, everything I'd done to raise him alone after his mother died, I'd been reduced to nothing more than a burden they needed to dispose of. I reached into my jacket slowly and deliberately. My hands didn't shake, even though my heart was hammering violently against my ribs. I'd prepared for this exact moment over the past 6 weeks, rehearsing it in my mind. I pulled out the folder. Brown manila, worn at the edges from being carried everywhere I went, filled with papers and documents he'd never thought to ask about because he'd assumed I was too old, too broken, too defeated to fight back against their plans. Then I guess you'll want this, I said calmly, my voice not betraying the storm of emotions inside me. I set it on the kitchen table between us with a soft thud that seemed louder than it should have been in the tense silence. Gavin glanced at the folder, then back at me, his eyebrows pulling together in confusion and mild irritation. What is it? More medical bills you need me to handle. Everything you should have asked about before today. Everything you should have considered before calling your father a burden to his face. I walked toward the door, my damaged spine screaming with every step, but my head held high with dignity they couldn't take from me. Behind me, I heard the folder hit the table as Gavin carelessly pushed it aside without opening it, without even looking at the first page. He didn't even look inside to see what evidence I'd gathered against him. That was his first mistake, and it would prove to be his most costly one. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the small room above Gavin's garage where he'd moved me after I sold my house, and I remembered everything I'd given him throughout his entire life. Everything I'd sacrificed to make sure he had better opportunities than I did. My wife, Caroline, died when Gavin was just 14 years old. Breast cancer, stage 4, diagnosed and gone in 6 brutal months that destroyed our family and left me to raise a grieving teenage boy alone while drowning in overwhelming medical debt and crushing grief. I became both parents overnight, working double shifts at the welding shop, putting in 60-hour weeks that left my hands permanently scarred with burns and my back damaged beyond repair, just to keep our small house and maintain Gavin's college fund that Caroline had insisted we start the day he was born. I never remarried after Caroline died, never even seriously dated anyone. Every spare moment, every ounce of energy, every dollar I earned went to Gavin, to making sure he had everything he needed, to being the father Caroline would have wanted me to be if she'd survived. I sold my small fabrication business, the one I'd painstakingly built from absolutely nothing over 20 years of hard work and sacrifice, to pay for his elaborate wedding to Brielle 5 years ago. $70,000 for a ceremony and reception that lasted 4 hours and impressed people I'd never met. When my spine finally gave out last year, 3 herniated discs and chronic nerve damage that left me unable to work or even stand for more than an hour without excruciating pain, Gavin had seemed genuinely concerned at first, like the son I remembered. "Move in with us, Dad," he'd said, his hand warm on my shoulder in the hospital recovery room. "We'll take care of you properly. You took care of me my whole life after Mom died. Now it's my turn to return the favor." I sold my house, the one Caroline and I had bought when we were newlyweds, with big dreams, and I gave Gavin half the proceeds without hesitation to help with their mortgage. $40,000 handed over trustingly because he was my son and I believed in him. That was 11 months ago. Almost a full year of living under their roof, watching my welcome wear thinner and thinner with each passing week. For the first 3 months, things had been tolerable and almost pleasant. Gavin checked on me regularly. Brielle made extra dinner portions. Josie, my 7-year-old granddaughter, would climb into my lap after school and ask me to tell her stories about her grandmother she'd never gotten the chance to meet. Then, Brielle's mother, Lorraine Jennings, started visiting more frequently, and everything changed overnight, like someone had flipped a switch from warm to cold. The whispers started in corners where they thought I couldn't hear. The cold dinners left on the counter for me while they went out to expensive restaurants. The way conversations would die abruptly the moment I entered a room, replaced by forced smiles and uncomfortable silence that felt like rejection. I started noticing how Brielle would physically stiffen whenever I asked simple questions about household matters. How Gavin stopped making eye contact during family dinners. How Josie was actively discouraged from spending time with me, redirected to other activities whenever she approached. Then I overheard the phone call that changed everything and set my current plan in motion. Brielle, sitting in the living room late one evening, talking to Lorraine in a voice she thought was quiet enough. "He won't be here much longer, trust me. We'll push him out gradually, make him uncomfortable. He's got nowhere else to go anyway. Once he realizes he's not wanted here, he'll leave on his own, and we won't have to feel guilty." That's when I started building the folder, document by careful document, piece by incriminating piece. Dinner the following week was worse than usual, and that was saying something considering how bad things had progressively gotten. I sat at the far end of the dining table, the spot Brielle had deliberately assigned me after Lorraine started joining their Sunday family meals. positioned just far enough away that I could technically be included in the meal, but close enough to feel deliberately excluded from every conversation. Nobody spoke to me during the entire meal. Not even Josie, who used to chatter endlessly about school and friends and the stories I'd tell her at bedtime, but who now sat silently beside her mother, occasionally glancing at me with sad, confused eyes before looking quickly away when Brielle noticed. Brielle laughed loudly at something Gavin said about their ambitious renovation plans, her voice bright and cheerful in a way it never was when addressing me directly. New kitchen cabinets would be absolutely gorgeous, and we could finally get those marble countertops I've been wanting forever. Maybe extend the island and add pendant lighting. "That'll be beautiful, sweetheart," Lorraine said, sipping her expensive wine like she owned the place. "You two work so incredibly hard at your careers. You deserve to have nice things in your home. You deserve to enjoy your space without complications." The emphasis on your space wasn't subtle at all. I ate my cold chicken and overcooked vegetables quietly, not bothering to point out that some of their space had been purchased with my hard-earned money. After dinner, I stood up to help clear the table like I always did, reaching for the serving dishes to carry them to the kitchen. Brielle physically moved me aside with her hip, not gently, almost shoving me out of her way. "I've got it," she said flatly, not kindly, not even politely, just dismissively, like I was a child getting in the way of adult work. I scraped my plate into the trash, noticing that their plates still sat in the sink, half full of food they'd been too full to finish, while I'd eaten every scrap of my meager portion because I'd learned not to expect seconds or additional helpings. "Martin," Lorraine's voice cut through the kitchen sounds, sharp and deliberately loud. I turned slowly, my back protesting the movement with sharp pain. She stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed over her expensive silk blouse, wearing that self-satisfied smirk she always wore around me, like she'd won some contest I hadn't known we were competing in. "Didn't expect you still around, honestly," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness and barely concealed contempt. "I figured by now you'd have moved into one of those nice senior communities. You know, where they have organized activities and medical staff on site 24 hours. Much more appropriate for someone in your deteriorating condition." "I'm 63, Lorraine. Not 90, I said quietly but firmly. She shrugged, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Still, wouldn't want to be a burden on your own family unnecessarily. Young people need their space to grow, to build their lives together. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is know when to step back and give their children room to breathe and thrive." That word again. Burden. She'd used it deliberately, I realized, testing to see if I'd react emotionally. I dried my hands on the dish towel, said nothing in response to her bait, and walked carefully up the stairs to my small room. That night, I heard them planning my future in the living room below, their voices drifting up through the heating vents. I pressed my ear to the floor and listened to every single word they said. They thought I was asleep, or perhaps they simply didn't care anymore whether I could hear their plotting. I stood in the dark hallway outside my room, my back pressed against the cold wall, and I listened to my son, his wife, and her mother discuss my future, like I was a piece of unwanted furniture they needed to dispose of before their next dinner party. "There's a state-funded facility across town," Lorraine said, and I could hear papers rustling like she'd brought research materials and brochures. "Low-income senior living. He'd qualify easily since he doesn't have any significant assets anymore after selling his house. They have openings starting next month." "He won't go willingly," Gavin said, and I heard doubt and hesitation in his voice. "He'll fight it. He'll say we're abandoning him after everything he did for us." "Then you make him understand he doesn't have a choice in the matter," Brielle snapped, her patience clearly worn completely thin. "He sold his house. He gave us the money. He's got no assets, no income, nowhere else to go. What's he going to do realistically? Sleep on the street at his age?" I heard Lorraine shift on the couch, her jewelry jingling. "We could file for conservatorship if necessary. Claim he's not mentally capable of managing his own affairs anymore. The surgery, the medications, the age-related decline. A judge would probably grant it without much question, given his medical history. Gavin hesitated, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair nervously. That feels extreme, Mom. He's still mentally sharp. He knows exactly what's happening around him. It's not extreme, it's practical and necessary, Brielle said coldly. He's taking up space we desperately need. Josie's going to need her own room soon as she gets older. And frankly, I'm exhausted from tiptoeing around him in my own house every single day. He's my father, Gavin said quietly, but there was absolutely no conviction in his voice, just empty words. And he's been paid back for everything he did, Brielle continued relentlessly. He's lived here rent-free for almost a year. We fed him, housed him, put up with his limitations and complaints. That's more than most children would do for aging parents. At some point, you have to think about your own family first, Gavin. Rent-free. The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. After giving them $40,000, after sacrificing everything I had, I was living rent-free, as if I were some charity case they'd taken in out of the goodness of their hearts. I walked quietly back to my room, each step carefully placed to avoid the creaking floorboards that would alert them. I opened my closet and pulled out the small suitcase I'd kept locked since moving into this house, the one they'd never asked about because they'd assumed it contained nothing but old clothes and worthless memorabilia. Inside was the folder. Much thicker now than when I'd started it 6 weeks ago after first overhearing their plans. I added new notes to the growing pile, writing down everything I'd just heard. Dates, exact quotes, the tone of their voices, their complete lack of remorse or guilt. Then I made a phone call to the one person I knew I could trust completely with this situation. Reed Halpern answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Martin? You okay? It's past 11 o'clock. I need to see you urgently, I said, keeping my voice low so they wouldn't hear downstairs. Tomorrow, if possible. First thing in the morning, if you can manage it. Silence on the line as Reed processed the urgency in my voice and tone. What's going on, Martin? Are you safe where you are? I'm safe for now, I said carefully, choosing my words. But they're planning to put me in a state facility against my will. They're discussing conservatorship, claiming I'm not capable of managing my own affairs. They want to remove me from the picture entirely so they can have my space. Reed cursed under his breath, the kind of language he rarely used in normal conversation. You're living with them. Do they know about Uncle Vernon's estate, the royalties and land? No. Gavin thinks I'm completely broke and dependent. He has no idea about the land or the mineral rights income. 5 years ago, my Uncle Vernon passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack, leaving me his 40 acres of rural land in Ohio along with all the mineral rights attached to it. Oil royalties, modest but steady and reliable, deposited quarterly into a separate account I'd never mentioned to anyone in my family. I'd never told Gavin about the inheritance. Never needed to mention it. It was my safety net, my insurance policy, the one thing I'd kept completely private in case I ever needed it for situations exactly like this. That land now generated $32,000 annually in passive income. I'd been quietly saving every penny, adding it to what remained from the sale of my house after giving Gavin his share. I had assets, significant assets. They just didn't know it, and I'd worked very hard to keep it that way. I'll pull everything together, I said quietly. All the documentation, all the evidence I've been collecting methodically. Can you meet me Wednesday morning at your office? I'll clear my entire schedule, Reed said firmly. This is important. Come to my office at 8 sharp. We'll handle this properly and legally. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folder. For the first time in months, I felt something other than sadness and resignation and defeat. I felt clarity, purpose, control over my own destiny. Reed's office smelled like old leather furniture and expensive coffee, the kind of place that radiated competence and trustworthiness from every detail. I sat across from him at his massive oak desk, the folder open between us, and I watched his expression change from professional concern to genuine anger as he read through everything I documented over the past 6 weeks. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from my old accounts. Screenshots of text messages between Brielle and Lorraine that Gavin had carelessly left open on the family computer, discussing strategies to manipulate me into leaving. Detailed notes from overheard conversations, each one carefully dated and time-stamped. Recordings I'd made on my phone when I knew they were planning something behind my back. "If you want to cut them off completely," Reed said finally, setting down the last page and removing his reading glasses to rub his tired eyes, "I'll make it absolutely airtight and legally unbreakable. But Martin, this is your son we're talking about, your only child. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do?" "I know exactly who he is," I said quietly but firmly. "And more importantly, I know who he isn't anymore. He isn't the boy I raised with love and sacrifice. He isn't the man his mother would have wanted him to become." "Are you sure about this course of action? Once we do this, there's no going back. The legal documents will be permanent and binding." I looked at Reed, really looked at him, and I saw the genuine concern in his eyes. He wasn't just my lawyer handling paperwork. He'd been Caroline's friend before she died. He'd held my hand at her funeral when I couldn't stand. He knew what she would have wanted. "He called me a burden directly to my face," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "His wife is actively planning to steal what little she thinks I have left. They're discussing putting me in a facility against my will, taking legal control of my entire life, erasing me like I'm nothing more than an inconvenient problem to be solved and disposed of." "And Josie?" Reed asked gently, knowing this would be the hardest part. "Your granddaughter?" That was the part that hurt most, the question that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling. "I want to protect her future," I said firmly. "Set up a trust she can access when she turns 18, a full education fund, enough to pay for college, books, housing, everything she'll need. But Gavin and Brielle get nothing, not one penny of what I've worked for." Reed leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully with his lawyer's analytical mind. "You want to play the long game? Watch them struggle while you wait?" "I want to be free from their manipulation," I said simply. "And I want them to understand exactly what they threw away when they decided I wasn't worth keeping around. I want them to know that the burden they were so eager to discard was actually the foundation holding up their entire future." Reed nodded slowly, his mind already working through the legal details and strategy. "Then let's get to work. We'll do this right and make it bulletproof." We spent the next 3 hours rewriting everything with meticulous care and attention. New will, carefully worded and legally bulletproof. New trust, structured specifically to protect Josie while excluding her parents entirely. New beneficiaries listed for every account and asset, and a document trail so detailed and comprehensive that it would be impossible for them to contest anything in court. I moved out on a Saturday morning while they were at Josie's soccer game, the timing deliberate and carefully calculated. I'd rented a small room above a garage from Mrs. Abigail Torres, a kind widow from my old church who'd lost her husband 2 years ago to a sudden heart attack. She'd mentioned during coffee hour that she had extra space available and enjoyed having company around the house. I packed only 2 boxes. One contained clothes, toiletries, and a few books. The other held the folder, legal documents, and personal papers I couldn't risk leaving behind where they might find them. The room was tiny, barely larger than a walk-in closet. A narrow bed, a small desk, a bathroom with a shower stall, and a window that looked out over Mrs. Torres's beautiful garden. But it was mine, paid for with money they didn't know I had, in a place where nobody whispered about me or treated me like I was invisible. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, listening to the peaceful quiet, and I opened a new journal I'd bought specifically for this purpose. On the first page, in my careful handwriting, I wrote, "Let them show me who they are." Then I started writing down everything, every detail I could remember from the past 11 months living under their roof. Every slight, every cruelty, every moment they'd made me feel worthless and unwanted. Not for revenge, though revenge would come naturally from the truth. For clarity, for documentation, for the historical record of exactly how they'd treated someone who loved them unconditionally. By the time I finished writing, it was past midnight and my hand ached from gripping the pen for so long. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Gavin. "Where are you? Your stuff is gone. Call me immediately." I stared at the message for a long moment, then turned off my phone without responding. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him feel even a fraction of the uncertainty he'd made me feel. The real investigative work began the following week, methodical and careful and thorough. I started tracking everything with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years working with exact measurements and specifications. Not just their words anymore, but their actions, their financial movements, their patterns of deception. Using the old account numbers I still had memorized, I logged into my previous checking account online, the one I'd officially closed after moving in with them, but that they'd somehow gained access to before the closure was complete. What I found made my stomach turn with disgust and anger. Gavin and Brielle had added themselves as authorized users to my old account months ago, probably while I was still heavily medicated and recovering from surgery and signing whatever papers they put in front of me without reading them carefully. They'd used those routing numbers to set up automatic monthly transfers. Small amounts, carefully designed not to be noticed immediately. $50 here, $100 there, sometimes $200 if they thought they could get away with it. I pulled up the full transaction history and printed everything. Over the past 6 months, they'd systematically transferred almost $3,000 from my account into theirs, calling it household expenses and caregiver compensation in their own financial records that I'd found. I documented every single transaction, highlighting each transfer, noting the exact dates and amounts, creating a detailed timeline that showed clear intent and pattern. Then, I opened a new account at a completely different bank across town, one they'd never think to look at. I moved all my quarterly royalty payments to the new account, changed my mailing address to Mrs. Torres's house, closed every possible access point they'd had to my financial life. One by one, I sealed them off from my money completely, and I waited patiently to see what they'd do when the transfer suddenly stopped coming. Kendra Walsh called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice nervous and uncertain on the phone. "Mr. Clay, this is Kendra Walsh. I used to be close friends with Brielle before we had a falling out last year. I heard through mutual acquaintances that you moved out of their house. I wanted to reach out because there's something you should know, something I've been carrying around for months that's been eating at me." "I remember you," I said carefully. "You came to Gavin's birthday party 3 years ago." "That's right. Can we meet somewhere private? I have information you need to hear, but I can't do this over the phone where someone might overhear." We met at a small coffee shop across town, far enough from Gavin's neighborhood that we wouldn't accidentally run into anyone who knew us. Kendra looked nervous when she arrived, glancing around like she expected Brielle to materialize from thin air. She was younger than Brielle, maybe 30, with worried eyes that suggested she'd been losing sleep over whatever she was about to tell me. "Mr. Clay, I want you to know this isn't easy for me," she started, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "Brielle and I were best friends for almost 5 years. We told each other everything, but we had a major falling out about a year ago over money she borrowed and never repaid, and we haven't spoken since. Before that happened, though, she told me things. Specific things about you and their plans for your future." "What kind of things?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice calm. "She was coaching Gavin," Kendra said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Teaching him exactly what to say to make you feel guilty, how to manipulate your emotions, how to make you believe you owed them more than you'd already given them generously." My hands tightened around my coffee cup, but I kept my voice calm and controlled. "Why would she do that?" "Because she's drowning in debt, Mr. Clay. Serious, crushing debt that she's been hiding from Gavin for years. Credit cards maxed out to their limits. Personal loans from shady lenders with terrible interest rates. She convinced Gavin that you had money secretly hidden away and that you were being selfish and unreasonable by not helping them more than you already had. I gave them $40,000 from the sale of my house." Kendra nodded sadly. "I know. She told me about it. She was actually bragging about manipulating you into it. She spent almost all of it in less than 3 months on designer clothes, furniture, and paying down just enough debt to keep the creditors from calling constantly." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive, setting it on the table between us like it was evidence in a murder trial. I saved things, she said quietly. Messages, emails, financial statements. She showed me when she was drunk and feeling invincible. Screenshots of conversations between her and her mother, planning exactly how to get more money from you. I kept it all because some part of me knew this day would come eventually. She pushed the flash drive toward me. This is your insurance, Mr. Clay. Everything you need to protect yourself is on here. Use it however you need to. I just can't stay silent anymore knowing what they're doing to you. I took the flash drive, weighing it in my palm. Such a small thing to contain so much potential destruction. Thank you, Kendra. This means more than you know. She stood up to leave, then paused. Mr. Clay? Brielle isn't a good person. I know that now. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it clearly. That night, I sat at Mrs. Torres's kitchen table with my laptop and opened the files Kendra had given me. What I found was worse than I'd imagined, and I'd already imagined pretty terrible things. Screenshots of text messages between Brielle and Lorraine, dozens of them, discussing in explicit detail how to manipulate Gavin into forcing me out of the house. Conversations about my supposed mental decline, my physical limitations, my usefulness as a source of funds they could tap. Bank statements showing $37,000 in credit card debt spread across 8 different cards. Personal loan documents with interest rates that should be illegal. Payment plans and collection notices and threats of legal action. And most damning of all, records of transfers into something called Jennings Investment Fund, an account controlled entirely by Lorraine that, according to the documents Kendra had obtained, didn't actually invest in anything legitimate at all. Brielle had been funneling money into her mother's personal slush fund for years. My money. Gavin's money. All of it disappearing into Lorraine's pockets under the guise of smart investments and retirement planning. I spent 4 hours printing everything, organizing it into clear categories, adding it to the folder that was now nearly 3 inches thick with evidence. Then I drove to the notary public office and had every single document officially witnessed and stamped. This is the last will and trust documentation I'll ever sign, I told the notary, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been doing this work for decades. She stamped each page with professional efficiency, dated everything, witnessed my signature on a dozen different documents. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years, carrying legal protection they couldn't break no matter how hard they tried. Josie's 8th birthday party was the following Saturday, and I wasn't officially invited, but I went anyway because she was innocent in all this. I'd spent 3 full days in Mrs. Torres's garage workshop, using tools I'd borrowed and wood I'd purchased with my own money, building a small jewelry box entirely by hand. I carved delicate flowers into the lid, sanded it until the surface was smooth as glass, installed tiny brass hinges that opened without a sound, and added a small lock with an ornate key. It was beautiful work, the kind Caroline would have appreciated, made with love and care and the skills I'd developed over 40 years of craftsmanship. I wrapped it carefully in newspaper because it was all I had, wrote Josie's name on top in my best handwriting, and drove to Gavin's house. Josie saw me first as I walked across the lawn. She was playing with friends near the bounce house they'd rented, but she broke away from the group the moment she recognized me. "Papa!" she screamed, running toward me with her ponytail flying behind her. I knelt down carefully, my back protesting sharply, and caught her in a hug that nearly knocked me over. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, breathing in the strawberry shampoo smell of her hair. I handed her the newspaper-wrapped box. She opened it slowly, carefully, her small fingers working at the tape I'd used. When she saw what was inside, her eyes went wide with genuine delight. "You made this? For me? Just for you, Josie. Nobody else. Your very own treasure box for keeping your special things safe." She hugged me again, tighter this time, whispering, "I love it so much," over and over. Brielle appeared then, materializing at my elbow with a smile that looked painted on, plastic and false. "Martin, we didn't expect you to come. This is a children's party, mostly for Josie's school friends and their parents. I wanted to see my granddaughter on her birthday," I said simply. "I brought her a gift I made myself with my own hands." Gavin walked over, tension radiating from every line of his body. "Dad, this isn't really appropriate." I'm not staying, I interrupted calmly. I just wanted to give Josie her gift and wish her happy birthday. I'll leave now so I don't disrupt your party any further. I kissed Josie's forehead and walked back to my truck, my heart breaking with every step. From the driver's seat, I watched as the party continued. Watched as Brielle carried the wooden box I'd spent days creating toward the large trash bin at the side of the house. She dropped it in without hesitation, without even waiting until I'd driven away, disposing of my handcrafted gift like it was garbage. But then Josie saw what her mother had done. I watched my granddaughter run after me, tears streaming down her face, clutching something in her small hand. She reached my truck just as I was about to pull away, knocking on the window with desperate urgency. I rolled it down and she pressed a folded napkin into my palm. "I'm sorry, Papa," she sobbed. "I wanted to keep it. I love it so much." On the napkin, written in crayon with the uncertain letters of a child still learning to write, "I miss you, Papa. Please come back. I love you." I kept that napkin, adding it to the folder as evidence of the one good thing in that entire corrupted family. I visited Marlene Rivers the following Tuesday, my former home care nurse who'd helped me through recovery after my spinal surgery. Marlene had been more than just a medical professional. She'd been genuinely kind when kindness was scarce, patient when I was frustrated with my limitations, honest when I needed honesty about my recovery. "Martin, you look so much better," she said when she opened her door, genuine pleasure in her voice. "You're standing straighter. Less pain?" "The pain's still there," I admitted. "But everything else is better now. I left Gavin's house. I'm living on my own now in a small room." We sat in her comfortable kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and coffee, and I told her everything that had happened. When I finished, Marlene shook her head slowly, her expression a mixture of anger and sadness. "I should tell you something I've been holding on to," she said. "Something that bothered me at the time, but I didn't know what to do about it." "What is it?" Brielle applied for a caregiver tax credit last year. Filed it officially with the IRS, claiming she was your primary caregiver, providing round-the-clock care for a disabled dependent. She listed specific hours, detailed care activities, everything needed to get the maximum credit possible from the government. My stomach dropped. "She never helped me. Not once. You were my nurse." "I know. I signed official statements documenting that I was your primary care provider during your recovery. What Brielle filed was complete fraud, claiming compensation and tax credits for care she never actually provided to you." I added that information to my mental list of their crimes, the list that grew longer every single day. Before I left, I handed Marlene a sealed envelope with her name written across the front. "What's this?" she asked. "Insurance," I said quietly. "If anything happens to me, anything at all, I need you to send this envelope to Reed Halpern immediately. His contact information is inside." Marlene looked at me carefully, concern written across her face. "Martin, do you think they'd actually hurt you? Physically harm you?" "I think they'd do whatever benefits them most," I said honestly. "And I think desperate people make dangerous choices. I want to make sure there's a record, evidence that can't be destroyed if something goes wrong." She took the envelope, holding it carefully. "I'll keep it somewhere safe. I promise." Reed filed all the paperwork on a Monday morning at precisely 9 o'clock. Official disinheritance documents, removing Gavin's name from every aspect of my estate. Trust establishment documents for Josie, with Marlene named as the trustee who would manage the funds responsibly until Josie turned 18. New beneficiary designations for every account, every asset, every possible inheritance. Gavin's name was removed from everything, scrubbed from my legal life as thoroughly as he'd tried to erase me from his. 2 days later, on Wednesday afternoon, Gavin received an official notice from the county clerk's office informing him of significant changes to estate documentation that directly affected him. He called me 17 times that day. 17 calls I watched go to voicemail, each one more frantic than the last. Finally, late that evening, a text message appeared. "What did you do? What is this notice about? Call me immediately. This is serious." I waited an hour before responding, letting him stew in uncertainty and worry. Finally, I typed back, "What I should have done months ago. What I should have done the day you called me a burden." My phone rang immediately. This time I answered, my voice calm and controlled. Dad, what the hell is this? The county clerk sent me some notice about estate changes and beneficiary modifications. What's going on? I updated my will, Gavin, made some necessary changes to protect my interests. Silence on the other end, heavy and shocked. You can't do that, Gavin finally said, his voice rising with panic. I already did. It's done, signed, notarized, and filed with the county. Completely legal and absolutely final. This is insane. You're my father. I'm your only family. You can't just cut me out completely. No, Gavin, I said quietly. You were my son. Past tense. But you made it very clear that I'm just a burden to you now. Those were your exact words, remember? I'm simply respecting your wishes by removing that burden permanently from your life. Dad, please, we can talk about this reasonably. I hung up without another word. He didn't call back that night. I think the finality of hearing the line go dead finally made him understand that something fundamental had changed forever. Brielle lost her mind when she found out about the estate changes. I heard about it from Mrs. Torres, who heard it from a neighbor who lived 3 doors down from Gavin's house, who'd heard the screaming through open windows, dishes breaking, furniture being thrown. The kind of explosive meltdown that makes people close their windows and pretend they don't hear anything. What did your father do? Brielle had shrieked at Gavin, loud enough for the entire street to hear clearly. What did he change? How much are we losing? This was supposed to be our retirement. Within days, their credit cards started getting declined at stores and restaurants. Their bank, seeing the sudden change in expected inheritance income they'd been counting on, tightened their credit limits dramatically and called in some smaller loans. Lorraine showed up at their house, furious and demanding answers. He's playing you. She snarled at Gavin, loud enough that the same neighbors heard this. Conversation 2. He always was smarter than he looked. I told you not to underestimate him just because he's old. They started scrambling, making frantic calls, trying to figure out exactly what I'd done and how bad the damage was. Gavin called Reed's office directly, demanding information and threatening legal action. Reed's response was professional and devastating. Your father has made his wishes explicitly clear. If you have concerns about his estate planning, I'd recommend hiring your own attorney to review your options. Gavin couldn't afford an attorney. They'd spent everything on maintaining appearances. 2 weeks later, Gavin's employer received an anonymous tip through their confidential reporting system. Someone had reported potential irregularities in his tax filings, specifically regarding dependent care expense claims that didn't appear to match reality. Brielle had filed for substantial tax credits over the past 2 years, claiming she was providing full-time care for a disabled dependent, me, who required constant supervision and assistance with daily activities. She'd also claimed Lorraine as a dependent, despite Lorraine owning her own condominium and having her own income from her late husband's pension. The Human Resources Department at Gavin's company launched an internal audit, standard procedure when tax irregularities were reported that could affect the company's liability. Gavin came home that Friday afternoon to find Brielle in the kitchen, frantically shredding papers, the machine overheating from constant use. What are you doing? He demanded, his voice edged with panic. Fixing this before it gets worse, she snapped back. Getting rid of anything that could be used against us in court. That's destruction of evidence. That makes everything worse, not better. Everything is already worse. Don't you understand that? But it was too late for shredding documents now. The IRS had already been notified weeks earlier, their investigation already underway with copies of everything. I didn't send the anonymous tip to Gavin's employer personally, but I didn't have to. Kendra's flash drive had contained copies of everything, and she'd forwarded selected documents to the appropriate authorities months before I even knew she existed. She'd been waiting for the right moment, building her own case against her former best friend. When Brielle's official audit notice arrived in the mail, Gavin tried calling me again desperately. This time I let it go to voicemail and listened to his desperate message later. Dad, please, I'm begging you. We need to talk. They're investigating everything. They're saying Brielle committed tax fraud, that she filed false claims. They're talking about penalties, maybe even criminal charges. I don't know what to do. Please call me back. I listened to the message twice, hearing the genuine fear in his voice. Then I deleted it and went back to the wooden frame I was building for Mrs. Torres. Reed called me that afternoon with an update. "They're panicking," he said, not without some satisfaction. "Gavin's left 3 desperate messages with my secretary. Brielle tried to make an appointment. Lorraine actually showed up in person, demanding to speak with me." "What did you tell them?" "That I represent you exclusively, that I cannot discuss your private affairs with anyone else, and that they should retain their own legal counsel immediately because they're going to need it desperately." "Good." "Martin," Reed said carefully, "they're going to lose everything. The house, their savings, possibly Gavin's job if the investigation finds he knew about the fraud. Are you sure you want to watch this happen?" "I'm sure," I said quietly. "They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences, just like I had to live with being called a burden." Gavin showed up at Mrs. Torres's house on a Sunday morning, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I was in the garage workshop, sanding a piece of oak, when I heard the knock. Mrs. Torres answered the door, but I heard Gavin's voice carrying through the house. "Is my father here? Please, I need to talk to him. It's important. It's urgent." She came to get me, concern in her eyes. I found him standing on the front porch, and he looked terrible, thinner than I'd ever seen him, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. "Dad, can we talk, please?" I didn't invite him in, just stepped out onto the porch and waited silently. "Please," Gavin said again, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm sorry. We're sorry. This whole situation got completely out of hand. We never meant for things to go this far." "Didn't you?" I asked calmly. "They're investigating everything. Brielle might face actual criminal charges, tax fraud, filing false claims. They're freezing accounts, calling in debts. We're going to lose the house, Dad. We're going to lose everything we built." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw the boy he used to be buried somewhere under the man he'd become. "You called me a burden, Gavin." I didn't mean it. I was stressed. Brielle was pressuring me constantly. Her mother was in my ear. I wasn't thinking clearly. "Yes, you were. You meant every word. You'd been thinking it for months before you said it out loud." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "We need help, Dad. I'm begging you. Please help us." I walked back into the garage and picked up the folder from my workbench. It had grown considerably since the day I'd first handed it to him, now bursting with documentation and evidence. "You should have opened this when I gave it to you the first time," I said, bringing it back to the porch. I held it out. "Here, open it now. See what you threw away." His hands shook as he took it from me. This time, he opened it. Gavin's hands trembled violently as he flipped through the pages, his face going pale as he realized what he was looking at. Bank statements showing the transfers he and Brielle had made from my accounts, screenshots of text messages I'd recovered, records of their fraudulent tax filings, documentation of every conversation I'd overheard and carefully transcribed. Copies of my new will showing exactly how much I was worth and exactly how much he was getting. Nothing. Evidence of Lorraine's fake investment fund. Proof of Brielle's massive debt. A complete timeline of their deception. "You documented everything," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You taught me that," I said. "Remember? When you were in college studying business, you told me, Dad, always keep records, always have proof. Documentation is protection." I listened to you and learned. He looked up at me, and for the first time in over a year, I saw something other than entitlement in his eyes. I saw genuine fear and the dawning realization of what he'd lost. "Dad, you were never the burden, Gavin," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "You were the disappointment. I raised you better than this. Your mother raised you better than this. We taught you about integrity, about family, about taking care of the people you love unconditionally." He flinched like I'd physically struck him across the face. "I gave you everything I had. I worked myself into permanent disability after your mother died, sacrificing my health and my future to make sure you had opportunities we never had. I sold my business to pay for your wedding. I gave you $40,000 without hesitation when you asked for help." My voice didn't rise. I didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough on its own. And you repaid me by treating me like garbage in my own son's house. By stealing from me systematically, by planning to lock me away in a state facility so you could take what little you thought I had left. I'm so sorry, he said, and tears were running down his face now. I don't care, I said simply. Your apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't give me back the year I spent being humiliated daily. It doesn't erase the cruelty. It doesn't make you trustworthy again. I took the folder back from his shaking hands. Get off my property, Gavin. Go home to your wife and figure out how you're going to explain to Josie why you're losing everything because of your own choices. I walked back into Mrs. Torres's house and closed the door firmly, leaving him standing on the porch alone with his regrets.